Hey everyone, my name is Randy. It's nice to meet you guys. And today I'm going to take you on a journey of the history of accessibility in video games. But before we start, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me and how I got started in gaming and how it changed my life. Some of you might have recognized me from TV and magazines from years ago. I've been an advocate for gamers with disabilities for 22 years and also the world's first quadriplegic professional video game player, and I go by the online name Nomad. I currently work with Facebook Gaming as their accessibility advisor. I also create gaming content on their platform in the hopes to bring accessibility awareness to millions. My gaming journey began in 1982 when I was only 3 years old. My dad took me to this bowling alley and arcade every weekend in a small town in Iowa called Belle Plaine. You would see my eyes light up just being around the neon lights, animated characters on the screens, and the loud sounds of everyone just having a good time. One day, he pulled a pinball machine up to the Pac-Man machine, took me out of my wheelchair, and laid me down on my stomach on top of the pinball machine so my chin could reach the Pac-Man joystick. I've been addicted to games ever since. We would play Atari together and have so much fun in all these games. In 1985, the original Nintendo Entertainment System was released. I was only 6 years old, but I remember seeing the graphics for the very first time, and there was nothing like it before. I knew that I had to have it, but there was one problem. I went from an Atari and one joystick and one button, and Nintendo invented a D-pad and two buttons on the right of that. I remember thinking, how am I going to play this? I went to a friend's house who had one. He and our friends went outside to play basketball. I crawled up to the Nintendo, unwrapped one of the controllers with my teeth, and set it on the floor in front of me. I stared at it for about 30 seconds and realized if I turned the controller 90 degrees counterclockwise and used my chin on the D-pad and my top lip on the A and B buttons, I could hit all the buttons that way. My friends walked in, and to their surprise, I was playing Super Mario Bros. All by myself. Soon after, my parents surprised my sister and I with a Nintendo for Christmas. My oldest sister and I were very competitive with each other. She beat Super Mario Bros. Before me, and I was so mad. But then I remembered, no one has yet beat my Double Dragon high score. How I played Nintendo back in the day is nearly identical how I play today. With the help of devices like the Titan II and the ability to remap buttons within the game consoles themselves, it's a game changer for those like me, but we'll get more into that later. Now, the history of accessibility in games has many key moments. However, we will cover the most impactful moments and the key moments of accessibility that I personally witnessed growing up. Believe it or not, game accessibility dates back all the way to the 1950s. A team of Canadian researchers, led by Joseph Cates, built a 13-foot tall computer that they named Bertie the Brain, and it could play tic-tac-toe against its human counterparts. Bertie was on display at the National Canadian Exhibition. So how could a computer game from 1950 possibly have any kind of accessibility features? Not only is Bertie the Brain one of the earliest computer games in recorded history, it happens to be the first game in recorded history to have a difficulty setting. Difficulty settings in games are very important for several reasons. Being inclusive to as many players as possible is key for a game's financial success. Whatever the reason, whether it's physical limitations, developmental disabilities, or simply easier access for young children, providing difficulty options creates a more enjoyable gaming experience for any player. Some of those players happen to be some of the greatest American heroes of our time. It's 1974 and nearly the end of the Vietnam War. Sadly, many of our soldiers didn't make it home to their loved ones, and the ones that did were either severely physically injured or suffered from PTSD. During this time, doctors and psychologists were experimenting with different therapies to help our wounded warriors. The same year, the very first video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, was released. As a form of new therapy, the U.S. government put many of these devices into rehabilitation centers and VA hospitals around the country. Research showed improvement in those that struggled with hand-eye coordination after sustaining injury from the war. Research also showed that those suffering from PTSD had less flashback and violent outbursts after playing video games. Games for Health was born. What was once an experiment is now a common practice in rehabilitation centers worldwide. Although the Magnavox Odyssey was not a financial success, it paved the way for a new gaming giant to try again many years later. That gaming giant, of course, is Atari. The success of Atari was a global phenomenon and launched the biggest boom in video game history. The Atari 2600 was affordable to most US households, and the games were even cheaper. It was everywhere. With more players means more feedback on improving the quality of their product from those players. Some of the games that were being released were just simply too hard or without clear instructions on how to play. Atari responded by introducing labels on the packaging that specified difficulty options or other game modes that would alter how the game is played. In this example, on the back of the box for Asteroids, you can see a special label that indicates there is a special mode for children that makes it easier to play. Even though Atari created the industry boom, it also caused the crash of the industry. With Atari no more, a new tech giant from Japan rises from its ashes. In 1985, the launch of the Nintendo Entertainment System had graphics that were only seen in the arcade. The idea of perfect arcade ports at home caused a frenzy. Like the Atari before it, the NES was affordable and soon in nearly every home. Nintendo was known for its family-friendly games and wholesome family values. Several years after the NES was already on the market, they realized that children with special needs were being left out of the fun. Nintendo took it upon themselves to create a hands-free controller to make their games and consoles more barrier-free as possible. They did not sell the controller on the open market. The only way parents could obtain this device was by calling a dedicated 1-800 number set up by Nintendo. I was 10 years old and in the hospital with pneumonia when I first saw the controller. The doctor wanted me to do breathing exercises and thought playing games with this device would help. You put the joystick in your mouth and move your head around to do the D-pad movement. And in the joystick, there's a straw. You blow in the straw to press the A button, and you inhale for the B button. It was really cool to play games this way, but didn't work for the games that require you to press A and B simultaneously, like how you jump in Double Dragon. With the release of the CD-ROM, games started to become larger, with better sound, and story-driven, with full video cinematics. By 1993, some story-driven games had subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. However, the option to turn them on and off was not a common practice yet. With the release of games like Mega Race, Wing Commander 3, and Star Wars Rebel Assault, the ability to enable or disable subtitles started to become utilized more and more. Subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing hits home because my niece is deaf. As a deaf gamer, I see her struggle daily with what direction sound effects are coming from, and sometimes losing track of the story due to lack of spatial awareness indicators and subtitles. Luckily, developers like Epic Games are including these accessibility features in their most popular games like Fortnite. When I was 16 years old in 1995, I had a life-threatening surgery to correct my severe scoliosis. My spine was crushing my heart and my lungs, and the doctor said without surgery, I would not have made it to my 18th birthday. However, I only had a 30% chance to survive that surgery. As expected, it didn't go very well. My limbs collapsed, and I died twice on the operating table. Although the surgery was ultimately a success, I remained in a coma for 4.5 months. I spent my entire sophomore year in the hospital for rehabilitation. I had to learn how to talk again because my vocal cords were damaged from the tracheotomy. I had to learn how to breathe on my own again and get my digestive system back on track. The hospital nurses got together and contacted the Make-A-Wish Foundation because they believed my strength through the process was deserving of a little happiness after a year of undergoing extreme pain and intense therapy. When they told me Make-A-Wish Foundation chose me, I thought to myself there were other kids who deserved it more. They assured me some of the other kids I made friends with who were suffering from cancer and HIV were also getting wishes granted. I could have wished for anything, but I still felt I didn't deserve a reward for wanting to live. So I kept my wish humble. I wished for a Sega Saturn and games. I ended up receiving the Sega Saturn before release date, all launch titles, a new TV, and a Pioneer stereo system. The day everything arrived, I just couldn't believe it. My best friend Smiley and I stayed up all night playing the games and drinking Mountain Dew. I was already a huge Sega fan. I had the Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, Sega CD, and of course the Sega 32X. With the release of the Sega Saturn, Sega made it mandatory and a requirement that all games released for the system had options for mono audio and button remapping. In my eyes, Sega was already a leap ahead, and that trend continued with the Dreamcast. One of the great things about the Sega Saturn was its awesome home ports of some of the most popular arcade games of that era. Speaking of arcade games, in 1999, polygonal racing games were everywhere. Games like Daytona USA, Arctic Thunder, and San Francisco Rush 2049 were some of the most popular. Out of these three, one was more accessible than the others. Atari's San Francisco Rush 2049 arcade machine had an option for individuals who could not use the foot pedals. The game had an auto-detect feature that would accelerate or brake depending on the action on screen. The really cool thing is, Atari continued making the game's controls even easier on console. The Sega Saturn version of the game gave you the ability to remap the accelerate, brake, left steering, and right steering all on the analog stick. It was fun to put my chin on the analog stick and not have to hit any other button. It was like driving my wheelchair, but going at the speed of 250 miles per hour. The next generation of consoles after the Dreamcast seemed to drop the ball in accessibility requirements. Games were no longer required to have button remapping or other features. Even though I adapted to each console through each generation, I finally found a game that I loved but was hard for me to play. In 2007, I was invited by Microsoft and Activision to participate in the Call of Duty 4 beta. I had a controller that allowed me to use the analog thumb clicks as my left and right triggers. I absolutely loved Call of Duty 4, but I struggled with holding down the left trigger while trying to aim down sight and shoot. I posted on their message board and asked if they would consider adding a toggle option to the aim down sight button. Over 25,000 people responded. Infinity Ward honored my request and named it after me. The Nomad button layout continues to be a tradition in the franchise to this day. It's something that I'm very proud of, and I'm honored to be a part of its legacy. With many advocacy groups and nonprofit organizations rallying behind accessibility in gaming, AAA studios like Bungie were listening. Destiny became the first game that had a dedicated menu for accessibility options in 2015. Some of these options, including controller behavior and colorblind options. The industry realized there was still more to be done. That same year, Sony launched a console update for the PS4 that added accessibility features like button remapping, zoom level, large and bold text options, and closed captions, and it set a high bar. Microsoft quickly followed suit. 8 months later, Microsoft updated the Xbox One with their own accessibility features similar to Sony's. With accessibility gaining traction in video games, it was more important than ever to have an outlet to voice ideas and collaborate in future inclusive initiatives. Both Microsoft and Sony hold summits to specifically discuss the importance of accessibility. Inclusive design teams are becoming common practice in game development due to these important discussions. Microsoft's Inclusive Tech Lab, led by Bryce Johnson, is a great example of a company wanting to do better for their customers. Microsoft tests new products with people of various special needs to come up with ways that their experience can be better. The greatest thing to come out of that tech lab is the birth of the Xbox Adaptive Controller. I was lucky enough to participate in this project and give feedback based on my own experience. When the Super Bowl ad aired, everyone I knew went crazy because they knew I was an early tester for the project. The ad didn't just show a product, it showed why accessibility needs to exist. And on that note, I see a world in our future to be truly barrier-free. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and hopefully next year I'll get to meet you all in person. Thanks so much for watching.